Bibles and go ahead and turn over to Matthew chapter 26. Matthew 26, we're going to fly all over the place this morning. We are a people who expect God to do the unexpected. That's the theme of our lesson right now. We're going to be right in the Gospels. We'll start in Matthew 26. What a difference it makes. And let me make sure I've turned myself on here. I have. Good. And so they're playing around with the buttons there, and we'll make sure, we are on. Good. And so Matthew 26, we're looking at the disciples this morning, of course, Jesus. What a difference a few days make, don't they? You just think about how awful Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is to Jesus Christ of this last week of his life here on earth. In this week before the cross, leading up to the cross, and how awful it was, and how awesome Sunday is. And that's really the lesson, isn't it? All of us understand that perspective. We understand that at the cross, it was rough for Jesus, and then he was resurrected. And we just sang the song, we have the living hope. And that's why we're here this morning. We hope to have, we don't hope, we know, right? But we hope too that we have eternal life, and that hope is strong because it's based on the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And so we have that. But then as we think about the cross this morning, I want to do this with you. I want you to think about just how the disciples must have seen this unfold. And so I want us to have the disciples' perspective for a moment. And so I guess the first question I want you to think about, and if you have your notes there, I've got some blanks for you. The first question I want you to think about as we move into this is, do you live in a pre-resurrected Jesus world or a post-resurrected Jesus world? And that is the fundamental question for us as Christians. Which world do you live in? And I'm going to tell you, truthfully, I struggle with this question. It's like, I get going and I start thinking, God's just not doing it. And I get disappointed in God. And I'm living in a pre-resurrected Jesus world. So where do you live this morning? What is going on in your life? Can you honestly say, I'm living in a post-resurrected Jesus world? We'll look at the difference here right now. So I want you to, first of all, notice the reaction. What are the disciples going to do as Jesus is led away to the cross? So we know this story well, so I'm only going to hit just a few verses here and there in the text. And so here's Matthew 26, verse 56. So notice the reaction of the disciples. That's where we're going with this. We don't know how many disciples were at the cross when Jesus was crucified, of course. We know, well, there was at least one, because Jesus is going to speak to him about his mother. And most of them watched helplessly from a distance. But many, many more probably were just as far as they could get from what was about to take place on the cross. Matthew 26, verse 56, he gives us a little bit of insight there. He says, but all of this has taken place that the scriptures of the prophets may be fulfilled. Then all the disciples left him and scattered. That really is... That's the name of this is what the disciples are going to do, aren't they? They left him and they scattered. Or as my text says, they fled. And so the cross, this darkest hour in history, had a profound effect on the disciples. So Jesus is there at the cross. And what did they do first? So I just want to give you, lots of things you could list, but there's several that I want us to see. John 16, we're going to go back and forth all throughout the Gospels, kind of get this complete picture of how the disciples reacted to Jesus and what he's about to go through. You know, he had told them a whole bunch of times, right? Hey, I'm going to have to suffer and die on a cross, and 3 days later I'm going to be resurrected. It's all going to be good. God's taking care of everything. And they're like, no, they can't believe it. And so I want you to think from the perspective of the disciples for a moment here. What would it have been like for the cross to have occurred? You've just spent 3 years with Jesus. You've just watched him heal people. You've watched him perform all kinds of miracles. You've seen him raise people from the dead. You have been witness to all the amazing things, and then it starts. They do those blows, right? With that hammer of those nails going through his hands and feet, and you know they have to just be just, I don't know of a better word, grieved over what they are watching. Chapter 16, John now, 16 through 20. A little while and you will no longer behold me. Again, a little while and you will see me. Some of his disciples therefore said to another, what is this thing he is telling us? A little while and you will not behold me, and again a little while you will see me. And because I go to the Father. And so they were saying, what is this that he is talking about? We don't know what he is talking about. Jesus knew that they wished to question him. He said to them, are you deliberating together about this? That I said a little while and you will not behold me, and again a little while and you will see me? Truly I say to you, you will weep, you will lament, but the rest of the world will rejoice. You will be sorrowful, but don't worry, your sorrow will be turned into joy. You've got to hang on to those words. Your sorrow will be turned into joy. So it grieved them, right? I mean, they're upset. It's like he didn't do it. He could have saved himself, but he didn't do it. And so they go through that weeping and lamenting. Not only that, they're shamed. Luke chapter 23 now. So go back to the Luke text. We get this word shamed now. The cross shamed the disciples. How do we know? Luke 23, 47. When the centurion saw what had happened. I mean, this is the guy that's a Roman centurion. He's not been with Jesus for 3 years. He's probably never once heard Jesus say, I'm going to die on a cross and 3 days later be resurrected. He's never heard those words. And yet look at what he does. When he saw what had happened, he began praising God, saying, certainly this man was innocent. And all the multitudes who came together for this spectacle, when they observed what had happened, began to return, beating their breast. And all of his acquaintances, all of the disciples, the women who accompanied him from Galilee were standing at a distance, watching. And you just think, wow, the shame that's involved in this. It's not like Peter denied him 3 times just because he just didn't want to act like he knew him. It's the shame of it all, isn't it? The cowardness of it all, just what they're going through. When Jesus needed them, when he's at his distress here on the cross, I mean, they don't even bother taking his body down. Somebody else has to do that. The people that have been with him all this time, they're not even going to show their faces that much to take his body down. I mean, they were like cowards and they knew it. They huddled together behind the locked doors. They're afraid of what might take place here. It's not just denying him, it's a shame of this. It's like, wow, and this is where I get into the picture now. I start thinking about a lifetime of living my life, and I start questioning. Have you ever done this? Have you ever thought, I don't know about this Jesus. He doesn't seem to do what I think he should do if he was really Jesus. I hear the disciples in that, don't you? When I was a lot younger, of course, I start thinking that, right? You watch a loved one go through something so debilitating as what my mother went through, and I would think, why doesn't God just do it? I had hoped God would have done something more for her, but he didn't. Have you ever been at that? Maybe you're at that point this morning, I don't know, where you're like, I had hoped God would have taken care of that by now. He's not done it. I had hoped the pregnancy would have actually worked, and it didn't. I had hoped that God would have given me a better job, and I'm stuck here in Longmont, Colorado. I had hoped that he would have mended the relationship, that he'd have made me whole. He'd have made those people whole. He'd have kept them on the right track. He'd have saved our marriage. He'd have saved my relative. He'd have saved those people. He'd have saved that whatever. There's a million little hopes lingering in this room right now. If we just start going around the room, we could hear them, right? Do you hope for something and God's not done it? Welcome to the world of the disciples. This is what they now understand. And I think this is where the disciples are at. I know this is where the disciples are at because I've joined with them in the same place, it resonates with me. The cross disappointed them. I think that's what this is all about. Luke 24 now, 19 through 21. This is an interesting little place here. It's the road to Emmaus. Jesus is actually secretly visiting a couple of disciples who are walking away there from Jerusalem. And one of them is, they've got their names there, and they have visited Jerusalem. They're unaware of the things that have happened. He asked them, are you the only ones visiting Jerusalem and you don't know what's just happened? Verse 19. So he said to them, what things? And they said to him, the things about Jesus the Nazarene. So they're like, they don't know it's Jesus. So they're like, you don't know what's happened in Jerusalem? You don't know about the guy that's died on the cross? And he's like, what are you talking about? And they said to him, the things about Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word in the sight of God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him up to the sentence of death and crucified him. And we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all of this, it's the third day since these things happened. Did you hear it? I promise you this is the most difficult words in all the Bible. So you're going to have to read it again. You can put a little place on the side margin if you like. You can do whatever it takes, but you should highlight verse 21 because I promise you there's going to be, if it's not today or yesterday or a week ago, it's going to come up. And one or two of you are actually going to be talking to an elder 5 years from now or 10 years from now or 20 years from now, and you are going to say, without saying it like this, I had hoped that God would have done something about this. And he didn't. He just didn't. I can hear it. I've heard it 1,000 times now that I've gotten to be a minister and I'm old enough. I've heard hundreds of Christians say it, just like what they have said. We were hoping that God would have come through, but he didn't. Do you hear it in their voice? We were so foolish in this disappointed God and what he will not do. That's where they're at. And of course they're wrong, aren't they? Just like I am wrong when I say the words. And every person who has ever said it is wrong. But the disappointment's there. We had hoped. We had hoped, but it was too late. We had hoped, but we know God doesn't listen. We had hoped, but Jesus was not the Messiah after all. So they were the most disappointed of all men, weren't they? Because they'd been with him for 3 years. They had seen him operate. They'd seen him in his compassion. But now it's just a false dream. It's just a false Messiah. It's just a nobody dying on a cross. Well, we know the rest of the story, don't we? Luke 24. So let's just go back to chapter 24, verse 1 now. We'll get the other side of this, of course. There's that, we had hoped. The cross is disappointing people to this day. Maybe even you. Are you stuck on the cross side or the resurrection side? That's the question. Matter of fact, I'll just sneak it in real quick. Verse 25, notice his rebuttal. And he said to them, verse 25, Jesus himself said, "Oh, foolish, how foolish you are, and how slow to believe." See, that's Jesus' rebuttal to that. It's like when we're stuck in that place where we think there's no hope, Jesus is like, how foolish you are. Are you not paying attention? Luke 24 now. So now let's get the second little point here. Why do you seek the living among the dead? But on the first day of the week at early dawn, they came to the tomb bringing the spices which they had prepared, and they found the stone rolled away. And when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. And it happened while they were perplexed about this, right? Behold, 2 men suddenly stood near them in dazzling apparel. And as the women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, if we get the rest of the text, right, they actually say, "Where's the body that we may take care of it?" They still don't get it. They're in pre-resurrection mode. And then this is what these two guys say to him. Why do you seek the living among the dead? He's not here. He's risen. Remember how he spoke to you while he was still in Galilee? Saying that the Son of Man must be delivered in the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and the third day rise again. So he asked them, why do you seek the living among the dead? And so it's like, it's so powerful, isn't it? It's like, here is Jesus saying that God has done it. He's turned defeat into victory. He's told them that he was going to do it, and he did it. They just weren't listening to his plans. And so that's where I think we need to be as Christians. We do not understand the miracle of the resurrection. Oh, we get the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. It's like he died on the cross. But that's the easy part. All of us find that easy, right? This thing about what is the amazing part about the resurrection? If we're paying attention to Scripture, Jesus being resurrected is not that amazing. Why? Why is it not that amazing? He told us he was going to do it. He's told us for 3 years, I'm going to die on the cross, and then I'm going to be, right? He's God. The grave could never have held Jesus. It's just like, that's just the way it is. God is God. He can't be dead. That's just not the way it works. So he resurrects himself. You know what the hard part is? I know that's not the hard part. The hard part is a bunch of men and women who failed to comprehend, and now they do. That's the amazing part. Do you hear it in their voices? Do you see what happened to these people? It's like the miraculous thing of all of eternity. The disciples are going to be transformed. In effect, it's the disciples who are resurrected. They go from cowardly, shameful people who stand off at a distance to the most powerful force that sweeps across the world with the gospel. How do they do that? It's all about the resurrection. It literally changes the course of history. And it's so complex. It's like, I know it's complex. This is such a simple lesson, and maybe you've heard it many times, but I don't think any of us really believe it yet. I think all of us still struggle with this, because every time, if I bring this lesson up to you in 5 years, if you were sitting in my office 5 years from now, Edward, I'd hoped God would have done more. I'm going to say to you, you don't believe in the resurrection yet. It's just not quite there for you, is it? And it's not there for me either. So we can understand this intellectually, but we cannot understand this in our lives. Can you see what happened to these men? On Friday, they were disappointed beyond belief. On Sunday, they are going to die for this Jesus. All within just that little, the switch is flipped, and they're transformed. So here's the way we need to say this. God is doing great things. Do you expect him to do it? It's just, here's the problem. It's just not going to be your plans. It will be his. See, that's part of the disappointment of this. It's a part of understanding what the disciples went through. It's a part of this transformation that has to happen, right? So here's the way this kind of worked in their lives. God took the disciples from the disappointment of unmet expectations to the elation of exceeded expectations. This is the primary problem that the disciples had. They didn't think God works. They thought God was like this, and God was like this. It's like they thought, the problem wasn't they expected too much from God. The problem was they expected too little. How did that work in them? I'll tell you how it worked with their lives. Romans 3, 22 through 26 would give us insight on that, right? We won't take the time to read it. But here's what they thought. This Jesus is going to get the Romans and save the Jews. And Jesus the whole time is thinking, I'm going to get death and save the world. Which one has the bigger dream? Who's dreaming bigger? Jesus or the disciples? See, which one had more hope? Which one's a more difficult task? Kick out the Romans and help the Jews, like have their land back? Or conquer death, and save anybody who ever wanted to be saved in the history of mankind. See the difference in scope? It's like God's like, yeah, I've got plans for you. And here they are. And they're this big. But we don't understand that. And we hope for this answer. And God doesn't deliver it. And we're like, God doesn't work. I know he doesn't work because he didn't do what I wanted him to do. And God's like, why would I do that? It doesn't mean. It's like, that's so meaningless if I did that. Like, who cares about the Jews and them having some land? I've got to save the world. And so you can hear that disappointment resonate still. So here's what we've got to do as God's people. We've got to make sure that we are living with what kind of thoughts? Do we think about God being small or God being big? That's really the question. 1 Corinthians 15. I promise we're almost finished when it comes to looking at some passages and bouncing all around. 1 Corinthians 15, 36 and 37. Jesus will say it here, or Paul will say it here. You fool, he says. Someone will say, how are the dead raised? What kind of body do they come with? And he says, you're so foolish. That which you sow does not come to life unless it dies. And that which you sow, you do not sow the body, which is to be, but a bare grain, perhaps of wheat or of something else. You and I have seen this happen trillions of times, Paul is saying. Paul is saying there has been 1 billion times that you have witnessed this in reality. Why don't you believe it? Are you still that foolish? He's like, how many times have you seen a little bitty little grain of seed thrown into the ground and it becomes a giant plant or a tree or 60 more seeds of wheat, whatever it then becomes? He's like, isn't that the way it works? So why don't you believe God works like that in your life? And I hear him saying that to me. He's like, do you not understand hope? It's like you're not wanting the big tree. You're just wanting like a single little sprout. And I'm not going to give you a single little sprout. I'm going to give you a plant that produces more fruit. And so God is so much bigger than what we think. So, what kind of expectations do you live with? Do you live with your own personal expectations? Or are you living expectantly for God to do great things? That's where hope rests. That's what the story of the resurrection is all about. He's saying to us right now, how much hope do you have? Do you hope the way God wants you to hope, or are you just hoping for your answers to be answered, for your stuff to happen? And so we had hoped, but God didn't do it. And they turned into such a powerful force. What a difference the resurrection makes. What a difference understanding that God is doing something bigger in your life than whatever it is you're living with right now. And whatever it is you think is the result of your life, God's got so much bigger plans. And so I've got to be open to the blessings to come, like the joy of an empty tomb on Sunday morning. So are you feeling hopeless? Remember the resurrection. You feeling like, wow, God's not working it out right? Listen to what God's saying through the story of the resurrection. That's our lesson. But I do have to do one more little illustration because it's so fun. Waited for a little while to do this one. And so it's so fun because it's like, hopefully you saw it. Maybe not, because there's lots of distractions up here. Right after service, Devin's looking for volunteers to come fill up the eggs and all the stuff. There's glow-in-the-dark eggs and all that. So if you'd like to help out Devin's team, come on up right after service. But over here on the left side, I don't even know what the doll is and everything, but I've got the game of life. Oh, yes. Who has played the game of life? Oh, come on. Oh, good. The older folks, some of the younger folks. As you know, Sheila and I are big game players. We have played this one. We also have the Adventurers set, which is fun. Do you know what's in the game of life? Right? Got the little wheel. It's one of the best wheels for random numbers in the business, right? Good stuff. So, I could take the board out. There's money involved. As a matter of fact, this is the way the game of life works. At the end of the game, who wins? Whoever has the most money wins the game right there. Whoever has the most money, they win the game. And so you have to go through the game of life, right? You have to do it. It's like you have a little car. It can be a pink car, a little blue car. And you're putting like, you get married or not, and you add a little person into your car, right? And then, unfortunately you have children which will cost you money. But then you go to college, but then it helps you with money, right? It's all that. And, you get certain jobs and all the stuff that takes place in the game of life. Host a family reunion. Ooh, sponsor public arts exhibit, pay it out. But then you get a tax refund, good news. Buy a sailboat, right? Sue another player and win $100,000. So, all kinds of good stuff in the game of life. So at the end, everybody gets to that final place, right? There at the game of life. And then everybody does what? They count their money. So you count your money, and whoever has the most money wins. And so I had the most money, so I win. I win the game of life. And what do you do next? What's the very next thing you do every single time? You pack it all up. We pack it up, don't we? I mean, does anybody even remember? Like, do you remember the last time you played? Who actually won? Maybe, maybe not. Certainly not the time before. You pack it all up, and you put it back. That was a great game. That was fun. But now it's gone. That really is the game of life, isn't it? Because we all know that we can't take it with us, can we? It actually doesn't stay with us. The game really is accurate. Because, matter of fact, we don't put all the money and everything back in the box. We put you in the box. Right? I mean, really. You're going to go in the box. Money's not going to go in there with you. We'll keep all the money. Thank you very much. Right? Kid would to whatever, right? Whatever it was. Taxes, all that stuff, right? And as a matter of fact, in the end, I would burn it, but I'm afraid the fire stuff will go on. The money gets all burned up. It's not even worth the paper it's printed on, right? And so you think, oh, that is the way it works, isn't it? It's like, it's not who has the most money that wins. There's something more to it, isn't there? There's something eternal. It's like, what is God doing with you? He's expecting us to think big in the real world of life. It's how did you influence eternity that matters. Because in the big scheme of things, hope is all about 10,000 years from now, 100,000 years from now. That's what hope's all about. And if I'm hoping for something to happen in the next 6 months, I've got a little God. If that's as far as what I can see, is some answer to something right here in that box, then I'm not really looking at things through the resurrection. What about you? Where's your hope? We're going to stand and sing now. We got a couple of things. I want to do a couple of things with this moment because God is a big God, and so we have the opportunity to do it, and so let's do it. We're going to have a final song, and so this is an opportunity to, of course, pray and to, if you've not been baptized yet, this would be a great time to be baptized. We have warm water. And not only that, but I would like for a couple of folks, if you can make your way down here, anybody can come on down here. We want to say a prayer, but so if you would like to be involved in that and involved in the prayers of this congregation and asking God to do great things, come on down right now. But I know that we have Joyce and we have Jean here this morning, and they're just two that I'm mindful of that are able to join us, and there may be others. And this would be a great opportunity for us just to spend a few minutes in prayer before we go to the rest of the day's events. And so I would love, matter of fact, for maybe the elders, if you guys could come up here, and maybe if Gene and Joyce and anybody else don't mind coming up here, we promise not to breathe on you. We want to just say a prayer. And anyone else or anything else that might be on your heart this morning, to remind ourselves, God is a big God, and He loves us. Where are you at? Pre-resurrection or post-resurrection in your hope this morning? Let's stand and sing.